The Green Man, not to be confused with the one from ancient mythology, is an urban legend that comes out of western Pennsylvania and select parts of Ohio. The Green Man, also called Charlie No-Face in some regions, refers to the broad story of a man that suffered through a terrible accident. The broad story of the Green Man is thought to have started between the 1940s and 1950s, although it isn't quite clear. The essence of this urban legend, as stated by folklore researcher Tom White, always involves a man who was electrocuted or injured in some type of industrial accident. The man grabbed a live wire, fell into an acid vat, or was struck by lightning, etc. Again, it's told differently depending on where you're from. The accident, though not fatal, left the man disfigured and his skin with a greenish tint. The man then went on to live or haunt deserted or rural places near the site of his accident. He is said to hide from the public eye due to his disturbing physical appearance. For years, curious people frequent these vacated locations, exploring and performing rituals to try to get the Green Man to show himself. The Green Man legend is mildly popular throughout YouTube and some paranormal sites, although you've probably never heard of the specific stories unless you live in the areas where they are told. One of the more popular tales comes from South Hills on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This involves an obstructed railway underpass called the Piney Fork Tunnel. Built in 1924 and abandoned since 1962, locals began to attribute this to the Green Man, a regional craze that was popular in the 1960s. Their story goes that an electrician who worked for a local power company was terribly shocked and fled to the area near the tunnel shortly after. Once word got out of the man's story and where he went, the tunnel became locally referred to as the Green Man Tunnel. To this day, for some odd reason, it still attracts tourists and paranormal enthusiasts alike. If you've watched my first episode of Interesting Entities, this might sound familiar to you. Disfigured man stalks local tunnel, terrorizes people who disturb him, etc. All these stories build on each other and borrow similar elements. You find this a lot with urban legends from the United States. A difference between this story and episode 1, which I highly recommend you watch, is that there really was a Green Man, though not so green, and his story is something to be remembered for. The story of Charlie No-Face is best described by Bob Barter, a writer for The Times, who covered the story back in 2007. Links in the description, I'll be referencing this article a lot. The story starts with a boy named Ray Robinson. Born in 1910, Robinson grew up on the outskirts of Beaver Falls, a small city located about 31 miles northwest of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There's no documentation of Robinson's life between the years 1910 and 1919, other than his father, Robert Robinson, passed away in 1917. Between these years, Ray's life was thought to be average for a boy growing up in that period. He was energetic, he liked swimming, and hanging out with friends. This would all change in 1919 when a curious bet would change Robinson's existence forever. On June 18, 1919, it's reported that Robinson and a few of his friends were heading to a swimming hole along the Beaver River in Morado, an area within Beaver Falls. Along the way, him and his friends would pass a bridge spanning over Wallace Run Creek. The now-defunct bridge would carry the Harmony Line, a trolley line that took passengers to areas around Beaver County. The bridge, as they tend to be, was a hotspot for kids to hang out and explore. When Robinson and his friends were passing the structure, they noticed a bird's nest perched on a pole located on the bridge. Him and his friends joked as to who would climb the pole and see how many birds were in the nest. One friend swiftly declined, saying that just 9 months prior, a local boy, Robert Little, died from electrical burns while playing on the same bridge. He wanted nothing to do with that. Robinson, wanting to be more adventurous, said he would climb the pole and examine the nest. He took lead and began climbing. Near the top of the pole, either by accident or pure ignorance, Robinson grabbed a live lightning arrestor. Immediately, 11,000 volts rushed through the boy's body. There was a blinding flash, and Robinson flew to the ground, suffering extreme burns. Robinson was promptly taken to a hospital in Beaver Falls, where doctors speculated he would die very soon. They gave the boy a few days, if that. The initial news article of the incident says Robinson hovered between life and death for about a month straight. Finally, by a miracle, he began to steadily improve, something no one expected. The aftermath left Robinson with half of his left arm, no eyes, no nose, disfigured lips and ears, though he could still hear, and a disfigured upper torso. Even after suffering all of this and nearly dying for a month straight, Robinson was still in good humor, as reported in a follow-up article after the accident. After Robinson was finally released from the initial hospital, he would move to others in the area for facial reconstruction surgeries, but none of them were very successful. After Robinson's recovery, the media stopped reporting on him, and his life was thought to return to quote-unquote normal. Not much is really known about Ray for the next decades to come. We don't know exactly what he did for the next 30-some years. An interview by Bauder with Robinson's nephew states that at some point Robinson learned basic Braille, but would still communicate vocally. During his adult life, he would have many hobbies which kept him busy from day to day, listening to music, tactile puzzles, hiking, and mowing the lawn, just to name a few. As you would imagine, Robinson didn't have a traditional job during his adult life. After all, he had no eyes. Many sources say he didn't go out in public either, at least during the day, because of his appearance. He did learn to weave rubber and leather though, crafting doormats, wallets, and belts, which his family would sell. For the most part, Robinson kept to himself, and most people in town would leave him be. I mentioned that one of his hobbies was hiking. Apparently, there was a hiking trail located behind the family house for some time. It said Robinson would hike it often, a lot of the times by himself too. To achieve this, Robinson would use a method where he held a hiking stick and fouled on the edge of the trail, 1 foot on the trail and 1 foot off. This would, let him determine if he was staying on the path by use of feel. Robinson hiked this path for years, until one day the hiking path was destroyed by a coal company. This led Robinson to start walking the road, since it's another path he could easily follow. He would begin walking Route 351 located near his home. Robinson did this several times a week, and always at night, starting at around 10 p.m. This became Ray's new walking hobby, and he really enjoyed it. Sometimes he would walk until the crack of dawn, escaping life while on the road. This made him happy. But not everyone was so content with his late-night walks. Robinson's family always worried about him when he was gone. His mother said that she could never sleep until he returned for the night, and sometimes he would pull all-nighters. Other family members expressed concerns, but ultimately, since Robinson was an adult, they couldn't stop him. This was a rational concern for the family members, as sometimes Robinson would get lost, almost get lost, or on many occasions, hit by cars. Robinson continued his late-night walks, and eventually some townsfolk would take notice to the odd character walking the road. Some teens initially saw Robinson while driving and thought it was bizarre and scary due to his appearance. Those teens would tell their friends about the no-faced man on the road, and then those friends would go and search for Robinson. Eventually, Robinson became somewhat of a local attraction, and it was around at this time where he would be given the nickname Charlie No-Face. It is unclear who started the nickname, but it stuck, and so did his level of popularity. Every night, teens would try to find Robinson and talk to him. It's reported that Robinson did try to hide in the shadows or avoid conversations, at least at first, but he usually did warm up to the people who approached him. Individuals would even give him beer and cigarettes in exchange for a conversation with Ray. They wanted to know his story, and Robinson really loved the free booze and cigs. Most of the time, the conversations were never about Robinson's disability though, as people later recall, but usually just a casual talk. This newfound attention would only escalate the family's worries about Robinson's walks, especially with alcohol involved. It said his family found him multiple times stumbling drunk down the road or waking up hungover in fields. Alcohol was never consumed in the Robinson household, so presumably Ray took this as an opportunity to drink and have a little fun. Some people claim they even took Ray to local bars to party. Not everyone was so nice to Mr. Robinson though, as other people would recall. Some would drive by yelling hateful slurs, and others would throw things. One article states Robinson would eventually have to start carrying a firearm on him, but I don't have any confirmation on that, and it doesn't seem probable. At this point, some years after he started walking Route 351, Robinson became a legendary local figure. After some town football games, people would drive up the road and search for him, so much so that there were often traffic jams, and police would have to direct traffic. People from other counties would make the trip up just to get a glimpse of Robinson himself. This is thought to be when the stereotypical green man urban legends really kicked off. Other towns would make up stories and tales of the no-face man, which were all just based off of Robinson. Everyone was fascinated not only with Robinson's condition, but the idea of his condition. It eventually spread to other states and even other countries. While all of this was going on, his family was still there, voicing their dislike for the attention and situation. His family hated the names people would call him and hated the pseudo-stalking. It went as far as people actually driving up to the family house, honking and yelling, "Let us see Charlie." Some entrepreneurs would go up to the Robinson house and ask to hire Ray for carnivals or freak shows. Ray really just was an average man with a horrible disability who created such a huge display for the small town and surrounding areas. The best part, he didn't even try. The walks of Ray Robinson would continue well into the 1970s until he gradually stopped walking Route 351. No one knows exactly why he stopped, but maybe he just got tired of doing it. Maybe it became too much with all the attention, or maybe it was just because of his older age. Regardless, sometime at the end of the 1970s or early 1980s, Robinson retired to live in the Beaver County Geriatric Center and probably quit public walking altogether. On June 11th, in 1885, Ray Robinson passed away at the age of 74. To people who spent their time searching and talking to Ray, this became sort of a summer tradition for them. I think a lot of people really looked up to him, especially in that generation, or at the very least appreciated his presence. Robinson left a lasting impact on the town's history and further inspired waves of ghost stories and urban myths, for better or worse. We went through a period of time where, unfortunately, Robinson's story wasn't told or even known, but now, most people who know of the Green Man, at least on the internet, know of the origin. A few movies and pieces of media are even being produced about the Green Man, but nothing has been completed thus far. Why was Ray Robinson and his walks such a big deal? I think this is a good example of how humans love to obscure the obscure. We love to take things out of the ordinary and turn them into fictional mysteries, despite there usually being a rational or explainable origin, and I'm no exception. Is this fascination with the quote-unquote paranormal an innate reaction of our curious imagination? Perhaps that's a topic for another video. Regardless, from retrospect, I do think this is an interesting story of a man that suffered a horrible accident. On the other hand, I think it's sad that people more or less treated Ray as a roadside attraction and didn't let him be. Maybe Ray enjoyed all the attention, wanted the attention, or maybe he didn't. I don't think anyone really knew. People who recall meeting Robinson had nothing but nice things to say about the not-so-green man. What are your thoughts about Ray Robinson and the urban legends that proceeded after? I'd love to talk about it in the comments. Thank you for watching this video, and if you want to see more content like this, why not subscribe to the channel? If you have any other suggestions for content, leave me a comment or email me at mt.caveat@gmail.com. Have a great day, guys, and remember, there's always an obscure origin to the obscure.